Missing Innocence, the Emma Grace Sullivan case. A pair of tiny sneakers, size 2, left abandoned on wet pavement outside Lincoln Elementary School. In September 2005, 6-year-old Emma Grace Sullivan walked out those school doors at exactly 3:47 in the afternoon. Her mother waited in the pickup line, just 200 feet away. Emma never made it to that car. What investigators discovered 18 years later, hidden inside her teacher's diary, will leave you absolutely speechless. This is the haunting story of a child disappearance that proves some missing children cases hold secrets darker than anyone imagined. Secrets that were written down, locked away, and buried in plain sight for nearly 2 decades. Emma Grace Sullivan was everything a 6-year-old should be. Bright copper curls that bounced when she laughed, a missing front tooth she was incredibly proud of, an obsession with butterflies. She collected them, drew them, even insisted on wearing butterfly clips in her hair every single day, without exception. She lived with her mother, Jennifer Sullivan, and her 4-year-old brother, Tyler, in the quiet suburb of Maplewood Heights, just outside Portland, Oregon. Jennifer worked as a dental hygienist, maintaining a careful routine that revolved entirely around her children's schedules. She was a single mother who had dedicated her entire life to making sure her kids felt safe, loved, and protected. September 12, 2005, started like any other Monday morning. Jennifer dropped Emma at Lincoln Elementary at 8:15 in the morning. The same chimey, the same ispochi, the same goodbye kiss on the forehead that had become their ritual. Emma's first-grade teacher, Mrs. Patricia Holloway, marked her present at 8:30. Emma participated in reading circle that morning, raising her hand to answer questions about the alphabet. She ate her peanut butter sandwich at lunch, trading her apple slices with her best friend Mia. She played on the swings during afternoon recess, her butterfly clips catching the sunlight. At 3:47 in the afternoon, the dismissal bell rang throughout the school. Security cameras captured Emma leaving through the main entrance, her pink backpack bouncing against her small shoulders, her butterfly clips glinting in the September sun. Mrs. Holloway stood at the door, waving goodbye to her students like she did every single day. Her routine unchanged in 14 years of teaching. Jennifer Sullivan sat in her silver Honda Accord, third car in the pickup line. She could see the school entrance clearly from where she was parked. She watched for those distinctive butterfly clips, those unmistakable copper curls. Emma should have been there in 45 seconds. Maybe 60 seconds if she stopped to talk to a friend along the way. Emma never appeared at the car. By 3:52 in the afternoon, Jennifer was out of her vehicle, running frantically toward the building. By 3:55, the school was on complete lockdown. By 4:10 in the afternoon, every parent's worst nightmare became Jennifer Sullivan's reality. Her daughter had vanished without a trace from a place that was supposed to be safe. This heartbreaking story of child disappearance would grip the entire nation for weeks. But the shocking truth revealed 18 years later would prove that the answer was there all along. Written in careful handwriting, hidden in a locked drawer, waiting to destroy everything everyone thought they knew about this case. Detective Marcus Reed arrived at Lincoln Elementary at 4:23 in the afternoon, just 36 minutes after the initial 911 call came through. A 20-year veteran of missing persons cases, he knew the first hours were absolutely critical in finding missing children. This wasn't just another child disappearance. This was every investigator's worst nightmare playing out in real time. The school had 3 exits that students and staff could use. The main entrance where Emma was last seen on camera, a side door near the gymnasium that led to the parking lot, a back door by the cafeteria that opened to the loading area. Security cameras covered all 3 exits. Detective Reed reviewed the footage immediately, his trained eyes looking for anything unusual. 3:47. Emma exits through the main entrance, walking normally, appearing calm. 3:48. Side door shows 2 teachers leaving together, no students visible. 3:49. Back door shows the janitor taking out trash bags. No children anywhere near him. The cameras showed every single person who left that building during the critical time window. Emma Grace Sullivan was confirmed as the last child through the main entrance. But there was a blind spot in the camera coverage, a 30-foot gap between the main entrance and the parking lot, obscured by a large oak tree that the school district had been meaning to trim for several months. Those 30 feet became the focal point of the largest missing child investigation Oregon had seen in over a decade. In that blind spot, investigators found Emma's pink backpack within the first hour of searching. The straps were completely intact. The contents were untouched. Her homework folder with carefully completed math problems. Her lunchbox with half a juice box still inside. A drawing she had made that morning of a purple butterfly with her name written in crayon at the bottom. 20 feet away from the backpack, they found one of her shoes. A tiny white sneaker with purple laces that Jennifer had tied that morning. The second shoe was never found, despite extensive searches of the entire area. Jennifer? Sullivan gave a statement through uncontrollable sobs that made it difficult for investigators to understand her words. She described Emma's daily routine in excruciating detail, her habits, her fears, her personality. Emma was naturally cautious around strangers. Jennifer had drilled stranger danger into her daughter's mind from the time she could talk. Emma wouldn't get into a car with someone she didn't know. She wouldn't wander off alone. She would never leave the school property without explicit permission from her mother, unless she trusted the person completely. Within 6 hours of Emma's disappearance, over 200 volunteers were searching the woods behind Lincoln Elementary. K-9 units tracked Emma scent from the main entrance, through the blind spot, to the edge of the parking lot where it vanished completely, as if Emma had simply evaporated into thin air without leaving any trace of where she went. By Tuesday morning, Emma's face was on every news channel across the country. Missing child vanished from school screamed the headlines in newspapers from coast to coast. The FBI joined the investigation, bringing federal resources to bear. The National Center for Missing Children issued an Amber Alert that went out to millions of phones. Emma's copper curls and distinctive butterfly clips became recognizable to people across the entire nation. Detective Reed built his suspect list methodically, following protocols for missing children cases. First priority, registered sex offenders within a 5-mile radius of the school. 12 individuals were interviewed extensively, their alibis checked and verified, their electronics seized and searched by forensic teams. All 12 were cleared of any involvement. Second priority, all school employees without exception, 37 teachers, administrators, custodians, cafeteria workers, everyone who had access to that building. Every single person was thoroughly investigated. Background checks were run. Polygraph tests were administered to anyone who had contact with Emma. Mrs. Patricia Holland, Emma's first-grade teacher, gave her official statement on September 13th. She had been teaching first grade at Lincoln Elementary for 14 years without a single incident. She was married to Robert Holloway, an accountant. They had no children of their own. She lived 3 miles from the school in a modest 2-bedroom house. She described Emma as a sweet, attentive student who never caused problems. She remembered waving goodbye to Emma at 3:47, watching her walk toward the parking lot with 5 other students from the class. She saw nothing unusual that afternoon. She noticed no one suspicious lurking around. She had no explanation for how a child could disappear in broad daylight. She passed her polygraph test with no signs of deception. The community rallied around the Sullivan family in ways that restored faith in humanity. Vigils were held every night for the first week. Yellow ribbons appeared on every tree, every mailbox, every storefront in Maplewood Heights. Volunteers organized search parties that covered hundreds of square miles. Donations poured in to help Jennifer, who had to take leave from her job to focus on finding her daughter. The case became personal for everyone in that small community. But as days turned into weeks, hope began to fade in the cruelest possible way. By October, the daily search parties had dwindled to a dedicated group of 20 volunteers. By November, the news coverage had moved on to other stories. By December, Detective Reed had to face the devastating reality that Emma Grace Sullivan had likely been taken by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The investigation hit dead end after dead end. A reported sighting in Seattle turned out to be a different child. A supposed confession from a mentally ill man was proven false within hours. Anonymous tips flooded the hotline, but none led anywhere concrete. Every lead that seemed promising ultimately went nowhere, leaving investigators frustrated and the family desperate. Jennifer Sullivan's life became consumed by the search for missing children cases similar to Emma's. She created a support group for parents of vanished kids. She appeared on television shows pleading for information. She never gave up hope, even as everyone around her quietly accepted that Emma was likely gone forever. Her son Tyler grew up in the shadow of his sister's disappearance, the ghost of a 6-year-old who never got to grow older. But then, 7 months into the investigation, police discovered something that changed the entire direction of the case. A witness came forward in April 2006, a woman who had been too afraid to speak earlier. Sarah Mitchell, a mother who had been in the pickup line that day, remembered seeing something she had dismissed as unimportant at the time. She saw Emma walk past her car in the blind spot. And she saw someone else there too, a figure she couldn't quite make out. Someone who appeared to be helping Emma with something. But here's what made Detective Reed's blood run cold. Sarah Mitchell said Emma seemed comfortable with this person. Not scared, not resistant, comfortable. The investigation shifted focus to people Emma would trust completely. Family members were re-interviewed. Family, friends were scrutinized more carefully. Teachers were questioned again, this time with more pointed questions about their relationships with students. The theory emerged that whoever took Emma was someone she knew well enough to follow without question. Mrs. Patricia Holloway was interviewed for a second time in May 2006. She maintained the same story, the same timeline, the same lack of knowledge about anything unusual. But Detective Reed noticed something during this interview that bothered him. When asked about her relationship with Emma specifically, Mrs. Holloway's demeanor changed slightly. She became more defensive. She talked about how much she cared about all her students equally, how she never played favorites, how she treated every child the same way. Nobody had accused her of playing favorites. Nobody had suggested she treated Emma differently, but she felt the need to defend against it anyway. Still, there was no evidence. No motive. No opportunity that made sense. Mrs. Holloway had been seen by multiple witnesses in the school building after Emma disappeared. Her car never left the parking lot until 5:30 that evening, over an hour after Emma vanished. Her home was searched with her full permission. Nothing was found. She cooperated completely with every aspect of the investigation. The case went cold by the summer of 2006. Detective Reed kept Emma's file on his desk, unable to let it go, but with nowhere left to turn. Jennifer Sullivan continued her advocacy work, channeling her grief into helping other families of missing persons. Tyler Sullivan started therapy to deal with the trauma of losing his sister. Life moved forward, but the question of what happened to Emma Grace Sullivan remained unanswered. Years passed, 2007, 2008. Emma's face appeared on age progression photos showing what she might look like at 8, at 9, at 10 years old. Every year on September 12th, the anniversary of her disappearance, the local news would run a story. Every year, Jennifer would stand in front of cameras and beg for anyone with information to come forward. Every year, the hope dimmed just a little bit more. Detective Reed retired in 2012, 7 years after Emma disappeared. He handed the case file to Detective Sarah Chun, a younger investigator who promised to keep working it. But even Detective Chun had to admit there was nothing new to investigate. The trail had gone completely cold. The witnesses had said everything they were going to say. The evidence had been analyzed and reanalyzed dozens of times. By 2015, 10 years after Emma's disappearance, most people had accepted she would never be found. The missing children case that had captivated the nation was now just a tragic statistic, one of thousands of unsolved cases involving vanished kids who seemed to disappear without a trace. Jennifer Sullivan never stopped believing. She kept Emma's bedroom exactly as it was the day she disappeared. The bed was made. The stuffed animals were arranged on the pillows. The butterfly drawings were still taped to the walls. She refused to give up hope that somehow, some way, her daughter would come home. The community had mostly moved on. New families moved into Maplewood Heights who had never heard of Emma Grace Sullivan. New students attended Lincoln Elementary who didn't know the story of the girl who vanished. The yellow ribbons faded and fell from the trees. Life continued, as it always does, even in the wake of tragedy. Mrs. Patricia Holloway continued teaching first grade at Lincoln Elementary throughout all of this. She never missed a day of work. She never showed any signs of being affected by Emma's disappearance, beyond normal sadness. She attended the vigils in those first few months. She spoke to reporters about how the tragedy had impacted the school community. She seemed like every other person touched by this heartbreaking story of child disappearance. But something was happening behind closed doors that no one could see. Something that had started long before Emma disappeared and continued long after. Something written in careful handwriting, dated and detailed, locked away where no one would ever think to look. The years continued to pass. 2016, 2017. Emma would have been 18 in 2017, legally an adult. Jennifer held a small memorial service, acknowledging what everyone knew but no one wanted to say out loud. Her daughter was almost certainly dead. The missing child case had become a likely homicide, though no body had ever been found. Detective Chuen periodically reviewed the case file, hoping fresh eyes might see something previous investigators had missed. She re-interviewed witnesses who were still available. She consulted with FBI profilers about theories and possibilities, but every avenue led to the same place. Nowhere. The case remained unsolved, a mystery that seemed destined to never be answered. Tyler Sullivan graduated from high school in 2019. He gave a speech at graduation about growing up in the shadow of tragedy, about learning to live with unanswered questions, about honoring his sister's memory by living fully. It was heartbreaking and beautiful. Jennifer cried throughout the entire ceremony, grieving both the son who was there and the daughter who should have been. Mrs. Patricia Holloway announced her retirement from teaching in January 2023. After 32 years of educating first graders, she was finally stepping away from the classroom. The school held a retirement party. Former students sent cards and letters. Parents thanked her for her dedication and kindness. She had touched hundreds of young lives over her career, shaping them in their most formative year of school. She planned to spend her retirement traveling with her husband Robert, who had also retired from his accounting firm. They sold their house in Maplewood Heights in March 2023, downsizing to a smaller condo in downtown Portland. The moving process was extensive. 32 years of accumulated possessions had to be sorted, packed, donated, or thrown away. Robert Holloway was going through boxes in the garage when he found something that confused him. A locked metal box, approximately 12 inches by 8 inches, hidden behind old paint cans and garden tools. He had never seen it before. He asked Patricia about it. She became immediately defensive, saying it was old-school materials, nothing important, she would deal with it herself. But Robert's curiosity was piqued. Why would old-school materials need to be locked in a metal box and hidden in the garage? Why would Patricia become so defensive about something supposedly unimportant? That night, while Patricia was out having dinner with former teaching colleagues, Robert found the key to the box in her jewelry drawer. What he discovered inside would crack open the Emma Grace Sullivan case after 18 years of silence. The box contained a diary, not a typical journal, but a detailed, methodical record spanning from 2004 to 2006. Page after page of careful handwriting, dates, times, observations, thoughts, feelings, all centered around one person, Emma Grace Sullivan. Robert sat in his garage reading his wife's words, his hands shaking, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. Patricia had been obsessed with Emma. Not in a normal teacher-student way, in a deeply disturbing, possessive, unhealthy way that revealed a psychological darkness Robert had never suspected in 38 years of marriage. The diary entries started in September 2004, when Emma was in kindergarten at Lincoln Elementary. Patricia had noticed her in the hallway. Copper curls, butterfly clips, bright smile. Patricia wrote about how Emma reminded her of someone. Herself as a child. She wrote, "The daughter she never had," The little girl she was meant to have before medical issues made it impossible for her to conceive. The entries became more frequent as Emma moved into first grade and was assigned to Patricia's class. She wrote about Emma's laugh, her handwriting, her kindness to other students. Normal teacher observations at first, but then the entries started to change. Patricia wrote about feeling a connection to Emma that transcended the normal teacher-student relationship. She wrote about how Emma filled a void in her life that nothing else had filled. She wrote about fantasies of Emma being her daughter, living in her home, calling her mom. Robert kept reading, his stomach churning with growing horror. The entries from August 2005, right before the school year started, showed Patricia's mental state deteriorating. She wrote about how unfair it was that Jennifer Sullivan got to have Emma when Patricia would have been a better mother. She wrote about how she could provide more for Emma, teach her more, love her better. She wrote about plans, vague at first, then increasingly specific. September 10th, 2005, 2 days before Emma disappeared, Patricia wrote about the blind spot in the camera coverage. She wrote about how she had noticed it months earlier during a routine fire drill. She wrote about how no one would see if someone walked through that spot with a child. She wrote about opportunity. September 11th, 2005. 1 day before Emma disappeared, Patricia wrote about making a decision. She wrote about how sometimes good people have to do questionable things for the right reasons. She wrote about how Emma deserved better than an overworked single mother who could ungive her everything she needed. She wrote about salvation and purpose and destiny. September 12th, 2005. The day Emma disappeared. The entry was written at 10:30 that night. Patricia described everything in disturbing detail, how she had asked Emma to help her carry some boxes to her car after school, how Emma had happily agreed because she trusted her teacher completely, how they walked through the blind spot together while other students went in different directions, how Patricia had quickly put Emma in the back of her car, covered with a blanket, before anyone could see, how Emma had still trusted her. Even then, believing this was some kind of game or special activity, Robert dropped the diary, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the pages. His wife of 38 years, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone, had kidnapped a child, had taken Emma Grace Sullivan and hidden her somewhere, had let that family suffer for 18 years while she went about her life as if nothing had happened. But the entries continued, and what Robert read next made him understand the full scope of the nightmare. September 13th, 2005. Patricia wrote about taking Emma to a cabin, an old family property in the mountains about 90 miles from Portland that Patricia had inherited from her aunt, a place no one knew about because she had never mentioned it to anyone, including Robert. The property records were in the aunt's name still. No one would ever think to look there. The entries over the following weeks described a disturbing routine. Patricia would drive to the cabin on weekends, telling Robert she was going shopping or meeting friends. She brought food, supplies, books, toys for Emma. She wrote about reading to Emma, teaching her lessons, playing games with her. She wrote about Emma crying for her mother at first, then gradually accepting her new situation. She wrote about Emma calling her Aunt Patty, a compromise from calling her mom. Robert felt bile rising in his throat as he realized his wife had kept a kidnapped child in a cabin for weeks while hundreds of people searched desperately for her, while the mother sobbed on television begging for her return, while the community tore itself apart trying to find answers. October 29th, 2005. The entry that revealed the darkest truth of all. Patricia wrote about Emma getting sick, a fever that wouldn't break, coughing that got worse every day. Patricia wrote about being too afraid to take her to a doctor, knowing questions would be asked. She wrote about trying home remedies, children's medicine from the drugstore, hoping Emma would recover on her own. November 4th, 2005. Emma Grace Sullivan died in that cabin at 7:32 in the morning. 6 years old, missing for 53 days, dead from pneumonia that could have been easily treated if she had received proper medical care. Patricia wrote about her devastation, her disbelief, her rage at the unfairness of it all. She had wanted to save Emma, to give her a better life, and instead she had caused her death. Patricia wrote about burying Emma's body on the property, deep in the woods behind the cabin, in a spot marked only by a circle of stones that looked natural. She wrote about cleaning the cabin obsessively, removing every trace that Emma had ever been there. She wrote about burning Emma's clothes, her toys, anything that could connect them. She wrote about driving home and going to school the next day and teaching first grade as if her entire world had just collapsed. The final entries in the diary showed Patricia's psychological state completely fracturing. She wrote about guilt that consumed her, about nightmares where Emma appeared, asking why Aunt Patty let her die, about considering suicide but being too afraid, about deciding the only way forward was to lock the truth away and never speak of it again, about convincing herself over time that maybe it had been a dream, a hallucination, something that never really happened. But she kept the diary, hidden but not destroyed. A confession she couldn't bring herself to burn. Robert Holloway called 911 at 11:47 that night, March 19, 2023. He told the dispatchee he had evidence in the Emma Grace Sullivan case. Within 30 minutes, police cars surrounded his condo. Detective Chun arrived personally, her heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and hope. Could this really be the break they had waited 18 years to find? Robert handed over the diary with shaking hands. Detective Chun read through it, her face growing paler with each page. This was it. This was the answer to what happened to Emma Grace Sullivan. Written in the perpetrator's own handwriting. Detailed, dated, undeniable. Patricia Holloway was arrested at the restaurant where she was having dinner with former colleagues. She didn't resist. She didn't express surprise. She simply closed her eyes and nodded, as if she had been waiting for this moment for 18 years. As if part of her was relieved it was finally over. The interrogation lasted 7 hours. Patricia confirmed everything in the diary. She led police to the cabin, which was exactly where she had described. She led them to the burial site in the woods behind the property. On March 21, 2023, 18 years and 9 days after she disappeared, Emma Grace Sullivan was found. Forensic teams carefully excavated the remains. Dental records confirmed what everyone already knew. It was Emma. The butterfly clips were buried with her, still clipped in her hair after all these years. That detail broke Jennifer Sullivan completely when she was told. Her daughter had never taken off those butterfly clips. Even in death, Emma held on to the thing that made her feel like herself. The news exploded across the country. The missing children case that had gone cold 18 years earlier was suddenly solved in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. Emma Grace Sullivan hadn't been taken by a stranger. She had been taken by someone she trusted completely. Her own teacher. The woman who was supposed to protect her and educate her had instead kidnapped her and let her die. Patricia Holloway was charged with kidnapping, child endangerment, and second-degree murder. The prosecution argued she had shown depraved indifference to human life by refusing to seek medical care for a sick child. The defense tried to argue mental illness, a break from reality driven by obsession and grief over her inability to have children. But the diary undermined that defense. The planning was too clear. The execution too careful. Patricia knew what she was doing was wrong. She did it anyway. The trial lasted 6 weeks in the fall of 2023. Jennifer Sullivan attended every single day, sitting in the front row, staring at the woman who had stolen her daughter. Tyler Sullivan sat beside his mother, now 22 years old, finally getting answers to the questions that had haunted his entire childhood and adolescence. The diary was read aloud in court, every disturbing entry, every calculated decision, every moment of Emma's final weeks alive. The courtroom listened in stunned silence. This wasn't a crime of passion or momentary insanity. This was a sustained act of evil, disguised as love. This was a woman who had looked into the eyes of a grieving mother on television and felt nothing but resentment that Jennifer got to be Emma's mother instead of her. Patricia Holloway testified in her own defense. She cried. She apologized. She said she never meant for Emma to die. She had only wanted to give her a better life. She said the guilt had destroyed her, eaten away at her soul for 18 years. She said she thought about confessing every single day, but could Yuen bring herself to face the consequences of what she had done? The jury deliberated for 11 hours. They found Patricia Holloway guilty on all counts: second-degree murder, kidnapping, child endangerment, obstruction of justice for hiding the crime for 18 years. At 64 years old, Patricia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She would die behind bars, just as Emma had died in that cabin. Cold, alone, preventable. Jennifer Sullivan gave a victim impact statement that brought the entire courtroom to tears. She talked about 18 years of not knowing, 18 years of hoping her daughter was alive somewhere, 18 years of imagining best-case scenarios and worst-case scenarios, never guessing the truth was somehow both. She talked about how Emma Esbedru had waited all this time for a little girl who would never come home. She talked about Tyler growing up without his sister, shaped by her absence in ways he would spend the rest of his life trying to understand. She also talked about forgiveness, not for Patricia, but for herself. For 18 years, Jennifer had blamed herself for Emma's disappearance. She had replayed that day countless times, wondering what she could have done differently. Should she have walked up to the school entrance instead of waiting in the car? Should she have called Emma's name when she didn't appear? Should she have never let her daughter out of her sight for even a second? The guilt had consumed her, corroded her, made her question every parenting decision she had ever made. Now she knew the truth. There was nothing she could have done. Emma was taken by someone who had planned it carefully. Someone Emma trusted, someone who had access and opportunity that no parent could have anticipated. Jennifer hadn't failed her daughter. The system had failed Emma. The school had failed Emma. An adult who should have protected her had failed Emma in the worst possible way. Emma Grace Sullivan was buried on November 10, 2023, 18 years after she died. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, former classmates, now adults in their mid-20s, who remembered the bright little girl with butterfly clips, volunteers who had searched for her in 2005, who never forgot her face, community members who had followed the case for nearly 2 decades, and countless parents who looked at their own children and understood how easily trust could be betrayed. Jennifer placed butterfly clips on Emma's casket, purple ones to match the purple laces on the shoes Emma had loved. Tyler gave a eulogy about the sister he barely remembered but never forgot. He talked about how Emma's disappearance had shaped his life, made him appreciate every moment, taught him that safety is an illusion and love is all that matters in the end. The case sparked national conversations about child safety in schools, about background checks for teachers that include psychological evaluations, about camera coverage that eliminates blind spots, about protocols for school dismissal that ensure every child reaches their parents safely. Emma's Law was introduced in Oregon, requiring enhanced security measures at all elementary schools. It passed unanimously. Jennifer Sullivan became an advocate for families of missing children cases with renewed purpose. She knew now that some cases do get solved, even decades later. She knew that truth can hide for years but eventually demands to be revealed. She worked with other families, helping them navigate the nightmare of having a vanished child, offering hope that answers might come even when it seems impossible. Detective Chun kept a photo of Emma on her desk, the same photo that had been used in the missing persons reports in 2005. Copper curls, butterfly clips, missing front tooth, bright smile. She looked at it every day as a reminder of why she did this job. To find answers for families who deserve them, to bring justice for victims who can't speak for themselves, to ensure that monsters hiding in plain sight eventually face consequences. Robert Holloway filed for divorce immediately after Patricia's arrest. He cooperated fully with investigators, turned over every document they requested, answered every question no matter how painful. He had been married to Patricia for 38 years without ever suspecting the darkness she carried. He attended counseling to process the betrayal, the guilt of not knowing, the horror of realizing his wife was capable of such evil. He moved away from Oregon, unable to stay in a place haunted by so many ghosts. The cabin where Emma died was burned to the ground by the property owner, who wanted no reminder of what had happened there. The land was sold to a conservation trust that would preserve it as wilderness, ensuring no structure would ever stand there again. The circle of stones marking Emma's burial site was left undisturbed, a natural memorial that didn't advertise its purpose but honored the child who rested there for 18 years. Patricia Holloway sits in prison today, serving her life sentence. She gives occasional interviews to psychologists studying the minds of family annihilators and child abductors. She talks about her obsession with Emma, her inability to accept that some people are meant to have children and some are not. She expresses remorse that sounds genuine but hollow, rehearsed but empty. She says she thinks about Emma every day, but it's unclear whether she's genuinely grieving or simply grieving the loss of her own freedom. The true crime community studied the case extensively. How could a respected teacher, a woman with no criminal history, commit such a calculated crime? How could someone pass a polygraph test while hiding such enormous guilt? How did she live with herself for 18 years, teaching other people's children while her own victim lay buried in the woods? The answer lies in compartmentalization. Patricia had convinced herself that what she did was an act of love, not evil. She had reframed the narrative in her mind, casting herself as the victim of circumstances rather than the perpetrator of tragedy. She had locked the truth away in a diary and in her mind, visiting it occasionally but mostly living in denial. It's a psychological phenomenon seen in criminals who commit atrocious acts but maintain functional lives, beloved by those around them who never suspect the monster beneath the surface. The Emma Grace Sullivan case teaches us uncomfortable truths about child disappearance and missing children. Most kids aren't taken by strangers lurking in vans. They're taken by people they know and trust. Teachers, coaches, family friends, relatives, people with access and opportunity. People who seem safe because they've been given positions of authority. The statistics are sobering. In cases of child abduction, 80% involve someone the child knows. The monster isn't usually hiding in shadows. The monster is often hiding in plain sight, wearing a smile, earning trust, waiting for opportunity. If you're finding this case as disturbing as I am, share this video to spread awareness about the reality of missing children cases. So many families are still searching for answers. So many cold cases are waiting to be solved. So many predators are hiding among us, wearing masks of normalcy and respectability. Subscribe to Missing Innocence for more shocking true crime stories about child disappearances and the families who never give up hope. Every case we cover honors the victims who deserve to be remembered, the families who deserve justice, and the investigators who dedicate their lives to finding truth. Emma Grace Sullivan was 6 years old when she was taken. She loved butterflies. She had copper curls and a missing front tooth. She trusted her teacher. She died alone in a cabin, scared and sick, calling for her mother who would have done anything to save her. 18 years later, her story finally came to light. Her killer finally faced justice. Her family finally got answers, painful as they were. This is why we tell these stories. To remember the victims, to honor the families, to expose the darkness that sometimes hides behind trusted faces, to remind ourselves that vigilance isn't paranoia, it's protection. That trust must be earned, not automatically given. The children deserve adults who will actually protect them, not use them to fill voids in their own broken psyches. Emma's butterfly clips are buried with her now. Her mother visits her grave every week, leaving fresh flowers and new drawings of butterflies. Tyler brings his own children to meet the aunt. They'll never know, teaching them about the sister who changed his life by leaving it. The community of Maplewood Heights planted a butterfly garden at Lincoln Elementary in Emma's memory, a living reminder of the child who loved butterflies and deserved so much more than she got. The Emma Grace Sullivan case is closed now, but the lessons remain open. The warning signs remain relevant. The need for awareness remains critical, because somewhere right now, another child is trusting someone they shouldn't. Another parent is assuming their child is safe when they're not. Another monster is hiding behind a respectable facade, waiting for opportunity. This is Missing Innocence, where we tell the stories that need to be told, where we honor the children who vanished, where we demand justice for the voiceless. Thank you for watching. Share this video. Spread awareness. Protect the children in your life. Because Emma's story proves that sometimes the greatest danger comes from the people we trust most. Never forget Emma Grace Sullivan. Never forget the butterfly clips. Never forget that evil can wear any face, even one that smiles at children every single day.